And our top focus in World DNA. US President Joe Biden has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on phone.
Well, the White House said that Biden and Netanyahu reviewed talks designed to secure the release of some of the Israeli hostages, coupled with an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
The Israeli government has come under intense pressure from its global allies to reach a ceasefire, as well as from demonstrators from within Israel, demanding the release of hostages.
White House said that Biden and Netanyahu also discussed the increase in delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This includes preparations to open new northern crossings starting this week. This comes as the US Central Command and the Royal Jordanian Air Force conducted a combined humanitarian assistance airdrop into northern Gaza. And according to the CENTCOM, the US C-130s dropped over 25,000 ready-to-eat meals in northern Gaza. Additionally, more than 13,000 meal equivalents of Jordanian food supplies were delivered as well.
Meanwhile, World Central Kitchen said that it would resume operations in the Gaza Strip today, and this a month after 7 workers of the US-based charity were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Well, Biden, in his call with Netanyahu, asserted his clear position on any Israeli assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Netanyahu has vowed to send troops into Rafah, where more than 1.5 million civilians have taken refuge. This comes as Israeli airstrikes on 3 houses in the southern Gaza city of Rafah killed 13 people and wounded many others. Hamas media outlets put the death toll at 15.
Meanwhile, Hamas said it had no major issues after reviewing Israel's latest proposal for a long-sought truce and hostage release deal in the Gaza Strip. Egypt, Qatar and the United States are trying to mediate a new truce for months now. A senior Hamas official said that a delegation will arrive in Egypt today to deliver the group's response to Israel's counter-proposal.
On the other hand, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will expand his trip to West Asia and continue on to Jordan and Israel after visiting Saudi Arabia. The State Department says that Blinken will work on ceasefire efforts, but added that it is Hamas that is standing between the Palestinian people and a ceasefire.
That's going to be right at the top of the list for Secretary Blinken, to keep pushing for this temporary ceasefire. We want it to last for about 6 weeks. It would allow for all those hostages to get out, and of course to allow for easier aid access to places in Gaza, particularly up in the north.
All right, for more on this, we are being joined by retired Colonel David B. DeRoche, Professor at Northeast South Asia Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Colonel, always a pleasure speaking with you. Welcome to World DNA. I wanted to just start with this now. Be it the hostage release talks or a U.S. call for an immediate ceasefire, what outcome should one expect from the review between Biden and Netanyahu, which has just been concluded? And when the Israeli Prime Minister is still keen on the Rafah assault, where do you feel they would be reaching at this time during any course of conversation?
I think that the most likely outcome is that the Rafah assault will be held off while Blinken makes his rounds of regional capitals and the negotiations go on in Cairo. I think that it's unlikely that the negotiations in Cairo will result in a ceasefire that only lasts as long as hostages are released, because I think Hamas realizes that once it releases the hostages, it will get a full-fledged assault. So I think basically Israel is pausing just at the request of the Biden administration to allow the diplomacy to run its full course. But I'm not very optimistic that we'll see a release of hostages and a permanent ceasefire.
Right, Colonel Roche is talking about the talks in Egypt. Hamas says that there are no major issues with the latest proposal from Israel and Egypt for a Gaza ceasefire. The State Department says that Blinken will work on a ceasefire efforts as he leaves for Israel in a few days. But the State Department added that it is Hamas that is standing between the Palestinian people and a ceasefire. Keeping this background, can we expect a ceasefire soon?
Again, I don't think so. I think that Hamas going into the negotiations has always said, yes, of course, there's not a problem, because they're very savvy at international public opinion. But I think internally they realize that they can't give up the hostages. If they do, they're going to be in a very vulnerable position. So I think that what we're just seeing is a temporary pause to for both sides to try to portray themselves to international opinion as the reasonable one. But I think that this we're seeing a military logic that supersedes all of this.
Colonel, I also wanted to get your thoughts on this. Now, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas feels that US can indeed rein in Israel. Now, if he were to just look back at the way Israel has proceeded with its war effort against Hamas in the backdrop of all the calls that US has made for immediate ceasefires or temporary ceasefires, talk to us about what are your thoughts on this. Do you really feel US can rein in Israel at this point?
It's a very common view in the Middle East and in the Arab world that the United States can kind of turn Israel on and off like a tap if we choose to. But I think that's mistaken. If you look, there's a long history of a lack of ability to influence our partners and allies that goes back decades, particularly when they feel that their security interest is at play. I think Netanyahu's position is that the American position is of interest. It's certainly worth listening to. It's probably worth exploring. But at the end of the day, President Biden is not responsible for the security of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu is. And I think that his view is the one that will prevail. And I think his view is that Hamas has to be destroyed as a military organization, which will require an invasion of Rafah. And I think the only thing holding him up is I think he will listen to the United States and say, okay, let's see if this diplomatic process will run its course. But I don't think he expects a positive outcome.
So there is a military logic behind it all, as you mentioned, and always a pleasure speaking with you, Colonel. That was Colonel David B. DeRoche joining us from Washington, D.C. Would be a pleasure speaking with you further as things develop.
Thank you.